there's a question here. Is there any difference between Aedes albopictus and Aedes scutularis ability to transmit dengue? This is for Professor Ronald. Differences in scutularis and albopictus in ability to transmit dengue. Combine that with, do you foresee any, do you think that scutularis is a primary vector in particular areas? Please, Ronald.
Well, as I said during the presentation, a little bit is known in Southeast Asian region, particularly about the scutularis involvement in the dengue transmission. But assuming with the similarities with Aedes albopictus from the morphological viewpoint and eventually from the biological viewpoint, I assuming that might not be much differences in the capability or capacity to transmit dengue vectors. So if we compare it with Aedes aegypti, the biggest difference, or in my particular opinion, why Aedes aegypti is considered the main vector for dengue, it is due that because it's highly anthropophilic and mostly breeding inside the houses, generally speaking. As in this study, we have detected Aedes albopictus breeding outside the house. But from the vector competence viewpoint, I think I will not expect too much difference. I hope to be able to answer this question more properly with data, maybe in a couple of months, because that is the another objective of this study that I have undertaken. So particularly here in Thailand. So hopefully I can provide better information in this respect to transmit the dengue viruses in Thailand. I know there is in some other countries, yes, the dengue scutularis again is considered a very good vector for dengue. For example, there are studies I think in some part of Australia, very old studies, even not so old. So where they determine the vector competence for dengue virus 2, serotype 2. So anyway, talking about here in Thailand, in this study area where I have been working, up to now I cannot answer that question, which is also eventually, sorry to, may come the question also about the insecticide. How susceptible to insecticide they are, or some other question related to these control methods.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Vargas. Now there's a question here for, I'm going to jump, there are some more for you, Professor Vargas, but I'll come back to you in a minute.
Okay.
To Frederik, there's a question here, mixed blood meals presented here are for which Aedes species? Can you pick up on that question quickly?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Basil, for posting this question. Yeah, so this is just an example data set that we actually took with permission from our collaborators at Vectorbase. And this is Aedes aegypti. Thanks.
Okay, so Frederik, let me throw another one at you very quickly because it looks like a very short answer. Which Aedes species is WHO thinking of adding to its threats map?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. Last time I spoke to Lucia at WHO about this, it was still very high level. I would assume they would start with Aedes aegypti, possibly albopictus as well. But yeah, no, that's all I know at the moment. This is just purely speculation. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you for venturing. Thank you, Frederik. So here's a great question. I like this one very much. And it's to be expected from somebody like Hans Overgaard. So Hans says, great presentation, thanks. This is to Joe. Do you think vertical transmission of dengue virus is of importance here? Assuming some degree of vertical transmission, how would this affect the calculations of the proportion of infected older mosquitoes? I think you can read between the lines what Hans is getting at, Joe.
I'm not sure I can. Clearly, it's if the virus is going to be transmitted to a large proportion of the offspring, and then all of those will grow full-scale infections themselves, the potential importance is significant. But one of the things I think that is difficult, makes life very difficult in the world of Aedes, is how transient epidemics are. So I'm assuming that human infectiousness, so the proportion of Aedes that ever get infectious and are therefore able to lay eggs that might be vertically infected, that proportion varies extremely widely in both space and time, just as primary dengue infections do, and therefore quite difficult to measure. So I've looked at data sets where a surprisingly large proportion of the adult Aedes are found with virus, and then others where clearly there's raging infection, but actually of the mosquitoes sampled, the prevalence of virus in the sampled mosquitoes is remarkably small. So yeah, I haven't seen data to persuade me either way on your question.
Okay, but an interesting topic of discussion. Thank you for that. So back to you, Professor Vargas. So should the control strategies differ for Albopictus and Scutularis? Are there any biological or behavioral features that can be exploited for control?
Well, as I say just before, we know a little bit, almost nothing about Scutularis from the biological viewpoint. So we don't know, at least in these settings, how susceptible they are to the insecticides being used in Thailand, for example. How susceptible they are to the Temefos. So actually, in most countries, they do not target to control Aedes albopictus as well. They target just to control Aedes aegypti. And that is one of things that we should keep in mind, that if we are controlling only Aedes aegypti, who will take place, or who will take the position of Aedes aegypti? Some other species may take the niche of the Aedes aegypti up to now. So we need to, again, I think we need to find out all this information. As I say, vector competence, longevity, and vectorial capacity of this Scutularis, comparing eventually with Aedes aegypti, even where there are the three togethers, to study the three togethers. So I don't know if some country is targeting to control Aedes albopictus. I'm not aware of that. So that's it.
Okay, yeah, no, fair enough. Thank you for that. So here's another question for Dr. Seelig. And the question says, I'm wondering about the overlap of the Global Vector Hub as a data repository and source of information. The overlap with other databases, for example, mapping of insecticide resistance and its potential overlap with the IR mapper, which has been active for many years. which are the two very comparable, and is there advantage in using one over the other? It's a very specific question. Any comments, Frederik?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very good, very pertinent question that, and it's something that we do come across a lot of times, and it is definitely something that we need to make very clear, is that we do not compete with other existing resources, such as IMAPA, which is indeed a very excellent resource, specifically focused on the topic of insecticide resistance. So Hans or anyone else, at the moment, if you're looking for dedicated information on insecticide resistance, particularly from published literature, which is, I think, the main data source for IMAPA, please do continue using them. In the longer term, however, we are aiming to participate and to create a sort of a shared environment with these existing resources. So IMAPA with the WHO malaria threats map and with Vectorbase, and having essentially one central pool of the same data that then the different resources can tap into and extract, usually through an automated system using an API, can extract the information that they want to display on their website. So in the end, hopefully, it shouldn't matter which of the websites you go to, you should have access to the same information from the central repository. And then again, this is really something, just to reiterate this, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel in any way, but instead we are really trying to collaborate with these existing resources where possible, and trying to make sure that the information available is as complete and accurate and up-to-date as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederik. Yeah, well spoken there about not wanting to compete with sister organizations and so on. So here's a question for Joe, which I see he's busy responding to online. But for the benefit of the general audience, let's pose the question so that he can respond generally. If we were to focus on reducing longevity in Aedes, what are the control methods that would be most effective? I'll give you a Nobel Prize if you can answer that in one sentence, but good luck. I'm not going to read the rest of the question, Joe. What kind of control methods would you recommend?
I don't think I've seen that question yet, so I wasn't responding to that.
It's the very last one in the Q&A box.
Hello, Sean. The characteristics that make that work with IRS and LLINs and Anopheles is the fact that these are repeated behaviors by the mosquito. I said at the end of my talk, they come to us. And the point is they come to us in every gonotrophic cycle. And it's that makes those so forgiving as interventions. If we don't get that female mosquito this time, we'll get her next time. She comes, she has no choice but to come. So it's looking for things that the Aedes mosquitoes have to do every now and again. So we've got, for example, those gravid traps, ovid traps, those ovid traps come sticky traps, things like that. Might that work? Well, that does have that same cumulative, I'll get a certain proportion each time. And if that proportion's high enough, then after 3 gonotrophic cycles, I'll get a lot. I was thinking, how could one use, for example, that gonotrophic discordance in Aedes, the fact that she'll come for another blood meal if that blood meal offers itself several times in a single oviposition cycle. How could that be used? So those are the kind of cumulative risks, the repeated risks that we should look for. But I think the clear point is, if we had one for Aedes, we'd be bloody well using it. Yeah. It would be so conspicuously powerful if we had it, and it's conspicuous by its absence.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, Joe. So here's one, going back to Dr. Vargas.
Yes.
Does Scutularis tend to transmit any particular dengue virus serotype in Thailand? Is it associated with any known specificity in serotype transmission?
Up to now, I am not aware of any information related to the vector competence in this species. As I say before, hopefully I will be able to provide this information in the coming months, because this is this part of this study is ongoing now to check for the vector competence for the 4 serotypes of dengue in here in Thailand. So at this moment, I cannot say anything about the vector competence in this species in Thailand. However, in some other countries, they had already proved that is highly competent for the dengue serotype 2. So, but again, I did not read whether they compare with the another serotypes. So, as you know, most of people concentrate in the most predominant serotype of the dengue virus when they do this kind of vector competence study. So that is one of the difficult situations when do vector competence. Sometimes had to specify or to select one serotype, and that is in some countries they select most the predominant one, the most of, and this used to be dengue serotype 2. In conclusion, up to now, I am not able to, I do not have answer for that because it's an ongoing part of the research that I am doing in this particular species, which is sharing the habitats with Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus here in Bangkok. I don't know how it's in other regions of Thailand now. So again, I am sorry for not being able to answer that question.
Not a problem. Yeah, thank you, Professor Vargas. So I have a question here for Dr. Seelig. The Global Vector Hub aims to be a major international recipient and repository of vector-related data. This is an admirable and necessary function. Does the Global Vector Hub maybe foresee that in time, maybe it expands on this to also actively disseminate these data by way of training courses, discussion fora, and webinars, and so on, instead of just being a recipient of data and a storage bin of data, but actually give it back out in some kind of processed form, such as I've hinted at. Any plans for that, Frederik?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And yes, we are very much already active in many ways in having outreach activities, but also, and I suppose once our fully functional version is live in a couple of months, we will also increase our activity in terms of really more specific, more dedicated outreach activities, particularly in collaboration with specialized local partners. So I could imagine Fiocruz in Brazil is a very likely contact, and we've been in touch already recently. The same goes for the Malaria Consortium and APMEN in the Asia-Pacific region, and the PAMCA and the African Union, Africa CDC, and Eliminate Yellow Fever in the African region. So we are always very keen to look out and collaborate with anyone. And if anyone would like to have discuss any future prospects of any specific workshop, then yeah, we would always be very keen to take this further. Then also in my presentation, we have already hosted a massive open online course and several workshops and webinars. So this will definitely be an ongoing activity. And yes, especially once we manage to accumulate more and more data of really high quality, then we are very keen to really promote this. And they're also creating another incentive for users to share the data, because then we can highlight the benefits that everyone in the community will get from making this data more openly accessible. Having said that, I should also point out that anyone who shares the data with us will always be ensured to be acknowledged as the proper owner of these data. So we don't want to be perceived as some sort of neo-colonial data grabbing expedition from the global north. We are always open for discussions also about how to make data ownership more equitable and how to promote really participation of local groups, of local stakeholders and networks, and making sure that they are the true owners of the data that they've invested a lot of work and resources and time into generating. Thank you.
Okay, well responded. Thank you for that, Frederik. So question for Professor Lyons. Aedes aegypti occurs widespread and abundantly across large areas of Asia Pacific, and it is known to be the main vector for yellow fever, which causes outbreaks and deaths in many areas of Africa and South America each year. So why do you think that so far yellow fever has not yet reached the shores of Asia? Given the naive immunological status of local populations here, the disease is likely to cause havoc if and when it does make its way here. So far, so good. But why? Any suggestions, any ideas, Joe?
No, and as I say, I'm not an expert in Aedes-borne diseases, especially not in this part of the world. But there seem to be two approaches to this. One is there are people who seem to infer the fact that it hasn't been a problem so far, that there must be some reason for that. And then the speculation as to what that reason might be. And then everybody else, I think, most of us, treat it as a catastrophe that's yet to happen, that's just waiting to happen. Actually, I think it's a thing that we ought to talk about maybe a bit more if we really think that. That's, as far as I can see, that's the sensible conclusion at the moment. What we know is that there just isn't enough vaccine in the world to do much to slow that down. And here's the point that's not just mentioned. It's not just about the vectorial competence of Aedes aegypti in Asia, but the vectorial capacity of it. We know that what limits the transmission of our Aedes-borne viruses at the moment is human immunity. It's people having got dengue infection, mostly infection without symptoms, sometimes with symptoms. Much more importantly than our control operations, either source reduction or the insecticides, we can affect the edges of the problem, but there are places where we know where the prevalence of dengue seropositivity is close to 90% by the time you're 10 years old. And that means very high vectorial capacity. So is the arrival of yellow fever something to be scared about? Yes. Is it a kind of Asia-wide, pan-Asia-demic? I fear it might be.
Thank you, Joe. So just a final comment. So it raises in my mind, somewhere it was this morning, but with my aged memory, it's already slipped out. I saw it's a new publication somewhere that made reference to, I think it was somewhere in South America, the high prevalence of a particular arbovirus, which appears to have spilt over into reduced COVID prevalence. So very interesting link there. And given the high prevalence incidence of dengue in Southeast Asia, and I think the relatively low COVID that's been found in this area, one wonders if there's any link over there. I'm totally speculating, and I should shut my mouth now as well. But
But I think that vectorial capacity, it's worth thinking about what happened with chikungunya in Latin America and the Caribbean. But if you look, for example, at Guadeloupe and was it Martinique? It might be another island. What we know, I think, looking at the figures, is that the entire island got that infection within the space of about 4 months, the entire island. And how do we know that? Well, because more than a quarter of the entire island was a reported case with symptoms. And with chikungunya, there are at least 4 times as many asymptomatic infections as there are symptomatic infections. So yeah, and afterwards, yes, the serology confirmed that. So what happens with that kind of vectorial capacity and a virus with a 40% case fatality rate, infection fatality rate, like yellow fever? That's not a good thought.
Yeah.